I know I just said ask 3 questions, but ask 3 humble inquiry questions. Questions you generally don't know the answer in the service of peeling back the onion, not performative questions, which is like, well, I don't know, did that frustrate you? And then you're like looking at your phone. You know, you're asking, yeah, it's performative. Okay,
you don't really care. You don't really care.
No,
right? You're not really listening.
You don't get points for that one. No gold star. There's a question mark at the end. Hello and welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina, Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Lynskey, leadership and self-trust coach.
Before we start today, we just wanted to make a quick announcement. We are entering the summer time of the year, and I will be doing a lot of traveling this summer. And so we will be going to every other week, at least until fall. We'll reevaluate at that time and see how it goes. But we did want you to know so that after this episode, we will be switching to every other week.
Today, as we continue our exploration of trust and meaningful connections, I wanted to share something that came up in my recent work with client staff who've been scratching the surface on the power of inquiry questions. And I asked Christina, what can I do to help deepen it? And she suggested Edgar Schein's work, who had written a book called Humble Inquiry. It's also called the Here and Now Inquiry. And today we're going to explore the highlights of his work, the impact it has on our own lives and those of our clients in any relationships, not just leadership contexts.
But before we start, folks, don't forget, if you could hit that like button and subscribe, it would really help us get this channel out to more people.
So let's begin, because I want to share Schein's concept of what he says about humble inquiry. So his definition is that it's the fine art of drawing someone out by asking questions to which you do not already know the answer, allows you to build a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the other person. And so what I love about it is his premise is really rooted in a few things. One, he talks about effective communication. It's not about giving advice or directives, right? It's really focusing on trust through genuine interest and curiosity. And of course, it's actually rooted in humility and recognizing that we don't know everything and that other people actually have valuable perspectives. He contrasts this with our cultural biases, especially in our Western task-oriented world. So we're always talking by telling, fixing, or knowing, which can undermine relationships.
Yeah, and he also talked about some of the core elements that we've been covering in our previous episodes on curiosity without judgment as really an important way to approach a conversation. Like in therapy, we call it starting to cultivate a non-judgmental stance. And that is about having an open mind rather than a predetermined conclusion. And so that creates space for people to express themselves authentically because they don't have that fear of being evaluated.
And there's also that willingness to be vulnerable, which means acknowledging that we don't know and being open to learning from others. And this can be challenging in the contexts from where we kind of feel the pressure to be the expert. Mm-hmm. And so
especially in your environment, in that work environment.
Yeah. And when you really need to have that genuine connection.
Yeah. And I think it is something we don't cultivate necessarily in this country about respecting the other person's autonomy. I mean, that's kind of being a thing, right? Women, people of color, like women having our own rights over our own bodily autonomy. So it isn't something that necessarily I think we think of automatically. So having insight around this means recognizing that people, they have the capacity to solve problems. Matter of fact, this is a key issue as therapists. Therapists who approach their relationship as the expert and I have all this knowledge I'm going to bestow on you to fix you or whatever, those tend to not go very well as therapeutic relationships. I mean, even as a therapist, it's about approaching it humbly. And my attitude is that my clients do have this wisdom within themselves. And my job through inquiry is to really help reveal that inner wisdom. And it's the same, like through your process with your clients, you're trying to help them find their wisdom. And you really only step in if they're truly stuck, right? Especially as a facilitator, or to tweak or refine the direction they were going. Like when you say that you're also as a facilitator helping to draw out the wisdom that's already in the group that you're working with.
Yeah, I see the same in the coaching world, right? That's sometimes hard because as coaches, we've already went through this transformational path ourselves, and we tell them, oh, this is the secret, this is secret. And we have to be careful because our secret may not work for them. Also asking the inquiry, we have some wisdom, but also getting the questions that sparked us on our journey. And I think that's what's also hard about coaches and differentiate coaches, because you want to help them, right? And so sometimes we get into not being able to have that humble inquiry. And I think the most powerful coaches are those who really have humble inquiry. Yeah.
And there's 4 types of inquiry, right, Karen? Edgar Schein talked about 4 different types of inquiry. We're going to briefly cover what the differences are, but we're really focusing today on the humble inquiry.
I was talking to Christina, so I really want to do the inquiry and the other 3 types, the actual 4 types, because I think it's really interesting to just at a high level understand there's 4 types, and just one isn't always right. Sometimes you need to use the other one. I think it's just to understand why you use one and what the strengths are and so forth and so on. So that's why I was like, oh, I loved it so much. That's why I wanted to make sure we shared this. So I want to do humble inquiry because this is what it's all about. It's that the genuinely curious and relation building, because it creates that safety. Because when I know that you really care, it's not about you trying to up me. It's about when I have authentic interest, right? So that's what your intention is, because your body shows exactly how you're thinking. So I just want to make sure that in humble inquiry is that authentic interest. You suspend judgment, you check your ego. So it's not about you. The other one is temporarily equalizes status differences. So imagine a boss and a employee. And so initially you're boss, employee, and now when you do humble inquiry, you're at the same. And that's why it's really important for leaders to tend to use humble inquiry, because it builds more connection. So let me give you an example of what I mean by temporarily equalizes status differences using humble inquiry. A leader would say something like, I'm interested in your perspective on how the project is going. The likely response then will allow for openness, feeling valued, willingness to share their honest thoughts. Now let me move on to the second one called diagnostic inquiry, which is where you actually steer the conversation, and it focuses on specific categories or dimensions of a situation. So you kind of like narrow it down where you want to shape the subsequent conversation towards a desired goal, such as problem identification or clarification. The example of that one would be, is that strategy serving your goal? If you ask that question, the likely response would focus on the problems with some direction, but still collaborative.
Right. Now, I do a lot of coaching on the third style, believe it or not. Schein calls it confrontational inquiry. I call it strategic inquiry, but the purpose is to influence thinking. And I do this type of coaching when I'm working with someone in their relationship. There's been a lot of like really regular conflict, and maybe there's a lot of irrational stuff flying around, and my client is feeling a little bit helpless. That this confrontational inquiry style could be very helpful. The process inserts my own, as the questioner, my own perspective or hypothesis about the situation. And I actually have a goal, which is to change the frame of reference of the respondent. So then you can kind of see if I've got a couple and the partner's like, you're the worst person in the whole wide world, then because of blah, 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 using inquiry in a way that changes that person's frame of reference, I'm not the greatest asshole in the whole wide world, can be really helpful in moving out of a stuck place. But say we're more in a work environment, a question might be you're working as a team and you're getting stuck. You could say, are we in a situation where perfection is becoming the enemy of the good? Now, I have a clear agenda. I want to move it forward. I'm really asking a question to bring a spotlight into this perfectionism and we're not making decisions, because my theory is that we're at 80% and we should see that and we can move on. So you can see I have an agenda, I have my own theory, and I'm using it in a type of question that prompts thinking. And then like I said, in relationships, an issue might be, do you think your tone might be why your partner shuts down? Like I'll do it as a therapist. I'll use this style. And even if like the partner's out in the room, because I do this with a couple of people, and they're recounting the conflict, and I'm hearing the tone. And so I'm going to be more confrontational about that and say, do you think your tone might be why your partner shuts down? Because I want to change that frame. I want them to stop and think for a moment. And then the next one, which I mentioned to clients, but part of my goal in doing this podcast was to create this library. And we hope to do an episode on this, but it's called process-oriented inquiry. I do see this as a more advanced skill, which is why we're not going to cover it here in part of an episode. But this is when we switch from focusing on the content of the interaction to the process, how we are interacting. And it's really hard to do because when you're in a heated discussion, both people tend to get really hooked into the content, right, wrong, true, false. And they're not seeing what's actually happening between them. And especially when you're in relationships like with your partner, your wife, your spouse, your children, you want to keep that meta awareness of the relationship, because that really should be primary. And if you can have part of you observing how you're interacting, not just what you're interacting about, then the inquiry is used to kind of do a timeout, right? So it's getting heated. And an example might be, hey, is how we're talking about this right now helping? Do you see I'm moving to not, I'm getting out of content and I'm going to process. And so hopefully the response is a pause, reflecting on the communication, because you feel it. If it's not going well, your stomach's getting tight. It's to bring that attention. Like, man, no, I feel like crap. And then stepping back from the content. So you would use this, say, during conflict and when the conversation pattern is getting unproductive. I am a really big fan of this. I do want to do an entire episode on it. It's going to take me a little time to pull that together because this is an advanced skill. And then what you discover is that each type of inquiry styles that we just talked about, it brings about a different emotional response in people. So this emotional impact is key to understanding why and when to choose humble inquiry over the other approaches. And so today we will do more of the deep dive on humble inquiry, and then we will cover the other ones in future episodes.
So I'm so excited because I got to share what humble inquiry is. So the context I want to think about is building meaningful relationships. And we're in such a world full of hurry and noise, and we don't need people to have louder voices or insistent voices, right? We don't want people to tell us what to do. We're just so much against, when someone tells you what to do, I just don't want to do it. I want to think for myself. And I think that's the point of us really understanding the importance of humble inquiry, because it's really being present, being there, right? Nothing about anything else, but just being there together because I care what you have to say. And that's how you bring about meaningful connections. It's about being open, not knowing. I can't read your mind like we've talked about before. It is truly just being with that person in front of me so that we can connect and understand each other and I can grow with them is really what it's about too. So what are some of the core qualities of humble inquiry? So we talk about humble inquiry allows you to actually build new relationships so that you can have some safety, because safety is really paramount in when you want to use humble inquiry, whether it be a new relationship or even what I would say existing important relationships, where you want to connect or you want to reconnect. It's also for new people that you're working with, new clients possibly. It also explores complex or sensitive topics when you have a whole bunch of people or even with one person where you open it up because it's complex. You just need to open up to understand, and then you open up more and it's kind of like opening up a gift and letting the different layers open up. And then when you generally don't know the answer, like we said before, and you need to expand everybody's awareness, that's another reason why I use humble inquiry. And also the early stages of problem identification. So, Christina, you teach humble inquiry skills in your practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the things you tend to highlight?
Well, we did an episode on models of communication styles, and I think it was called Are You Stuck in One Style? I'm not entirely sure. I'll put the link below because I can't remember right now the full title. But we talked about different quadrants. Like there's high inquiry, high advocacy, low advocacy, and it gave us these quadrants of telling, asking, observing, and generating. When we are in the inquiry stage, that you get the benefits that Karen talked about. But what I see is most of the time in communication conflicts is that people are really stuck in the telling style. And that's the opposite of inquiry. So this is the number one distinction I make over and over again with clients working in any kind of relationship, whether or not it's their partner. I work with clients who are struggling maybe in their work environment. So I do still bring my coaching experience forward, and I'll be listening and I'll hear that telling style. And when that happens, it can create this power dynamic telling. I'm telling you, I'm the active one, you're the passive one. And let me tell you, folks, that just does not work in a relationship, like an intimate relationship. So there's always an issue about overuse of telling that needs to be addressed. And then humble inquiry requires cultivating and mastering this art of curiosity that we talk about all the time. And this is why we've emphasized it so much, because remember what Karen said, humble inquiry is when you don't come in thinking you already know. You don't come in with your hypothesis. You really come with that beginner's mind. It is the aspect of setting aside your ego, your agenda for the moment, the need to be right, the need to be the smartest person in the room. It's allowing yourself to be genuinely curious. And that's what humble inquiry naturally evokes out of us. It also builds understanding and empathy. It creates better problem solving when I'm spending the time to inquire, to actually draw more information out of the person. Now I have that more robust set of data to put towards problem solving. And then if I'm also asking and doing inquiry, which includes, well, not just what do you think about this, but how do you feel about it? It makes that space for empathy. It allows the opportunity to reduce kind of stuck negative feelings because we have to allow ourselves to be surprised. And we've talked about this, Karen, that the caveman brain is always in a threat assessing mode. It's
Always,
not designed to, right? It's not designed to be noticing the daisies in the field. It's designed to be looking for the saber-toothed tiger in the field. And this happens in our relationships, especially if there's been a pattern of tension, that we enter it already having prejudged the situation. Oh, I'm going to be in the doghouse again. Oh, she's going to be mad at me again. Oh, he's going to hurt me again. Wait, oh, whatever that is, the tiger in the grass. And so in order to reduce that negative affect, we use humble inquiry.
And Christina, I just want to add something because you were saying that, as you guys saw from my face, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so funny because I'm just seeing a story, right? Where even before Mark says 2 words, and I assume I don't even give him a chance to have humble inquiry because I'm already there thinking that he's going to make the same statement again. And the feelings are already there. Here we go again. It doesn't even, so then, but it's just, I don't know what it is. It's like the tone or posture of it or something too, that I just make that assumption because I don't even give him a chance, right? To start. But that's the whole point. It's that whole intention. If he were to change the tone and his posture, that would help me out to realize, oh, he really does care. It's not of him like so it's interesting.
Well, but here's the thing, Karen, even if you're right that it's something he's frustrated with, so that's in the tone, and it's something he's been frustrated with 100 times, so your anticipation is correct, but to still use inquiry to get beyond the surface and
is what's important for me.
Yeah, beyond that moment, like, oh, yeah, okay, I forgot that. To be like, okay, wait, I could see that you're really frustrated right now. Like,
Mm.
why was this thing so important to you?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I'm actually taking some time to ask a few more questions because maybe if I knew that piece of information, it would actually influence a different behavior change. You know, I was working with a couple, and sometimes I'll do it's called a collateral session and talk to the husband, and he's telling me his perceptions. There's a lot of history he forgets, and I'll say, you know, do you realize that this is actually touching into her trauma and her childhood loss, and it's
Oh,
actually creating
wow.
fear, and that's why you're seeing this reaction and this anger and
Oh.
defensiveness, but it's really the little girl protecting herself from a devastating loss. And then once he can get that's what's really going on, like, then his tone changes. Even if this has been an ongoing frustration, that lack of inquiry to get really what's underneath it means we're always dealing at surface behaviors instead of what's driving the behaviors. This is why I'm a depth psychologist, so I do spend more time. I want to know what the root cause is to really affect meaningful change.
Yeah, and that's why you're saying earlier the pause is so important.
Yes. Yes. The pause.
I mean, this we always talk about. I mean, the biggest thing for us is the pause, right? To
Yeah.
notice. And
Yeah.
it breaks you away from the cycle, the pause and the
Yeah.
breath.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's interesting for me now is why we believe humble inquiry is such an important skill in today's age and time. And in times of uncertainty like we are right now, answers aren't obvious. And that's exactly why it's even more critical for humble inquiry. It helps us pause, align, and it allows us to truly hear one another before jumping into any decisions or actions or responses, because that will allow us to solve the problems faster together in unison, which is really what's so beautiful about it. And that's what I think it means, in relationships, whether it be work or professional. And what's so funny is there's a misconception that I used to think that inquiry takes more time than telling. And so I want to address that, because really telling does feel faster. Do this, right? And then you just hope they do it. And then you hope that they read your mind exactly how you would do it. And then often there's times when someone tells you to do something, unless you want it, there's resentment, there's power struggles, there's even sometimes passive resistance. So people may nod, but they're not bought in. And that's part of the reason why humble inquiry is important. And let's be clear, inquiry isn't analysis paralysis, though. It's about surfacing meaningful information that actually leads to better decision. In fact, it can short circuit overthinking. So if you've ever been in a meeting, which I'm sure we have, are we beating a dead horse? You know exactly what I mean by this.
Yeah, yeah. The value of respectful and humble communication. It is so helpful in avoiding those traps you just described. And humble inquiry creates a collaborative process rather than debate, or with that telling, the telling creates more of a transactional relationship. I always go to the caveman, like, me throw spear, you throw net. Um,
I love when you use the
so
voice.
it also invites deep listening. You need to cultivate deep listening, turn taking, mutual sharing. And through that process, it builds trust because it often creates the emotional experience of feeling seen. And folks, I cannot overemphasize the power when a person feels seen who you're interacting with. There is an oxytocin bond that happens that really creates that deep, meaningful, close, trusting relationship that I know Karen and I, we both try to cultivate in the different people that we work with and in our careers.
Yeah, it just opens you up. That's that psychological safety too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And there are specific phrases and question formats that kind of embody the humble inquiry that we just wanted to give you just a few of them. They're called, prompts, they're called, scripts, whatever you want to call them. So just a simple thing like, tell me more about, I'm curious about how you see this. What factors contribute to? What's important to you about this? The point of this is asking genuine questions again. It's not, a question like, so what do you think? It isn't very genuine. What do you think? It's just like, okay, I just want to just get your opinion, but I don't really give a crap about what you said. And I think that's what's important. Again, intention makes a huge difference.
And then there's common pitfalls to avoid. So we want to go over that and give you a little bit of troubleshooting. So I call this either a judgment wrapped in a question or disguised telling. So it's something like, are you really going to wear that shirt? Yeah, it's a
And
question.
yeah, it's a question.
Yeah, but that you heard it. That's a judgment that's just pretending to be a question.
I saw it on your face too, and your tone, right?
Right. Yeah, it's going to be in tone. It's going to be in your facial. Just don't even do that. There's premature problem solving, and that cuts off the inquiry, like that push to, come on, we just have to solve this and move on. You have to evaluate if there really is that urgency, or can you take 10, 15 minutes to do a little bit of inquiry to get down to that root cause. So the problem you're solving is actually where you need to be directing your energy.
And Christina, I found in client work, when I was consulting with leadership teams, they do premature problem solving because not everybody's on the same page as, like you said, what the problem is. So I think that's what you're getting at, to take the time to figure out what you guys are doing and what are some of the interests that everybody has about that problem, to solve that problem, because it brings everybody more together. Before you solve, okay, what is the real problem? Or what are we trying to solve or throw solutions at? We might be throwing solutions at different problems.
Well, yeah. And if you're in a relationship, I'm sure you know this, where one person just is in a struggle and they want to share, and their partner is immediately trying to solve the problem.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's like, I just want you to listen.
Yeah.
and then they're like, well, why do you, I want to fix your problem. Like, you're sad and I want to fix it. So some people temperamentally are wired problem solvers. That's a good thing to check in with yourself. Are you one of those kinds of people? Because this will be more work for you to learn the pause and just make it a rule. If you are a normal, quick problem solver, just adopt the rule. I have to ask 3 questions that I don't know the answer to before I jump into problem solving. And
wow,
just do that.
I love that. I love that idea. So 3 questions before I give any solutions. I love that.
You don't know the answer to.
Oh, I forgot that part. That's the humble inquiry part.
To start building the muscle, the reflex, because you have, say, an innate temperament to problem solve. I'm actually a problem solver. And this is what I did, especially as a therapist, is really learning to stop and do those 3 questions. And now I almost only do inquiry till I fully understand where the person's coming from. And then I'll go into maybe a telling, a teaching, a suggesting mode. And it's second nature now. So you can develop this.
And then they're more willing to listen because you ask questions. And also your solution or problem solving, whatever, your solution will be even more finely tuned to the situation because you'll know more.
Oh, yeah. When a person is still in the mode of they're sharing, partly because they're processing it themselves, and you jump quick into problem solving, even from the most loving motivation, the person who's sharing is less likely to be receptive, because inside they'll be like, how do you even know what I need? I don't even know what I need yet.
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to solve it. I wouldn't be bringing it up because I already know if I knew what it was.
And so you're not going to be receptive. You're feeling hurt, and
love it.
You get frustrated, and then the helper is feeling hurt because, well, I'm trying to help you, and you're just, no matter what I say is no, 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 or shutting it down. So both sides are unsatisfied in that situation. So learning that pause help the person through inquiry to get out what they need to get out. Then when you provide your insights, they will be much more receptive because they will truly feel that you understand, because they're starting to understand what's going on with them themselves also.
Okay,
So that's
cool.
just really important sort of process awareness. And then you want to avoid performative questions. So I know I just said ask 3 questions, but ask 3 humble inquiry questions. Questions you generally don't know the answer in the service of peeling back the onion, not performative questions, which is like, well, I don't know, did that frustrate you? And then you're like looking at your phone. You're asking it, yeah, it's performative. Okay,
So
let
you
me
don't
go
really
through.
care. You don't really care,
No,
right? You're not
no.
really listening.
You don't get points for that one. No gold stars because there's a question mark at the end. Now,
Ah.
there's also a type of questioning that's really interrogation. And some of you problem solvers, you have to be cautious about this because, and I have to be cautious about this. I have certain clients who I find myself, if they're really passive and giving like one word answers, I almost like get frustrated internally and I find myself shifting into a more of an interrogation because I'm trying to now yank those teeth out. I'm trying to yank that information out of them. And this is where it's better to notice and shift over to that process. So what I'll do when I catch myself is stop myself and say, I notice that I'm wanting to just like interrogate you right now. I know I'm feeling this frustration because I'm trying to understand, but you're only giving me one word responses. Is something going on right now? Can you help me understand it? And then I'll switch back into inquiry. And I do it by observing that meta relationship process going on. I don't like the way I'm feeling. I have to put on the brakes and be like, oh, what's going on? Again, we'll go into a whole episode on doing this process-oriented inquiry. And then finally, timing is important when you're doing inquiry because there can be timing mistakes. There could be times when something is urgent. That is not the time necessarily to do inquiry. Maybe it's someone that you don't know really well and you haven't established that relationship yet. There's different levels of humble inquiry. So you just want to be aware. And like for me, I got in trouble. I mean, I know Karen, remember Harry had to coach me and he told me I had problems with timing because I would do that inquiry maybe inappropriately in the middle of a group. And it wasn't humble inquiry. It was more of that confrontational inquiry. And it was terrible timing and it would just make things so much worse. So learning timing is some aspect of political savvy or interpersonal savvy that if you're like me on the autistic spectrum, that might be a little bit more work to learn how to do.
So let's go into some recommended path or practices that we could do. So what was interesting is, well, Christina already gave us a great one, which is if you're about to ask 3 questions, right? If you feel like you're going to problem solve, ask 3 questions before you problem solve, right? Or provide a solution to a problem. I think that's great. And then Schein's actually said something about he wants you to access your ignorance and realize that that is actually a strength. Curiosity is a strength. And you know what, guys? We don't know everything. I think this uncertainty of the world right now even more emphasized to me the importance for me to ask more questions and being more curious because I don't even know, like I feel like all of us together can work through different things that otherwise we would not be able to. So access your ignorance and know that that is actually a strength.
And Karen, I'd love to insert here. So when I started the journey of learning about autistic spectrum and where my challenges were, which is social norms, social communication, and really started understanding I don't have that wiring in my brain. So really like there is that ignorance around it. I shifted to be really honest about that. So clients, especially if they're talking about interpersonal stuff with their friends and they're trying to describe something that they seem to think I should know whether it's good or bad or whatever. And I don't. And so I like, so that was a good thing. That was a bad thing. I don't know. But in my ignorance on these things, it causes them to stop and challenge their own assumptions that are just in the unconscious. They don't even know why they're doing the thing.
I love it.
And it's because I'm really comfortable around my ignorance on these things as I'm like, I don't got the programming for this. You will have to explain every aspect and why that makes sense. Even something like, why do I have to keep my elbows off the table? I mean, why is that? It's rude. Well, why is it rude? Well, what makes it rude? and I don't know. And the person has to really think and dig down and try to explain things. So accessing your ignorance, some people will feel vulnerable doing that. But when it comes from a really genuine place, you'll be surprised. I can tell you, I have been met with a lot of humor and compassion and patience when they can tell I genuinely don't understand, but I'm asking because I want to understand.
And, it's so interesting because I always used to say there's so many books out there because there's no one way of doing anything.
Right.
So anyways, so the next one is a practice, which is the here and now humility, which is really being present. Not being on your phone and not thinking about what you're going to say, but actually being present. And then to do listening, focusing completely on the other person without letting your brain, like we were talking about, doing the internal dialogue about, okay, what do I want to say next in response to what she just said? I only heard the first part, but let me think what I'm going to respond to her. No, just stay present, listen to all the different things about what she's saying, and trust that your brain is smart enough to listen and then respond. And then after you listen, when you pause a moment, it shows that you actually listen instead of just harping right into after she finishes. It almost says like, yeah, I get what you're saying. And again, using open questions really shows that you value that other person's input, perspective, and wisdom. We all have wisdom to share, because we don't all hang out with the same people and have the same experiences. And this is why I always think that ignorance, it's not even called ignorance, is the fact that the ignorance knows that you don't know it all. That's that ego part. There's so many different perspectives that could come into any situation. So you just want to be more open to know that you don't know everything. So let's go back to another thing is to ask for examples and stories. So not just abstract generalizations where they tell you how they feel. How do you feel about this? That's important too. Or examples. So there's more clarity so that you're on the same page. And then
and like I said earlier too, when you're doing that, like pay attention to your own feelings and reactions during the conversation. And we've talked about putting that little bit of awareness on your own body, because that's where you're going to be having the sensations. And that helps with this process. What you can be curious about your own reaction. In the example I shared about, I noticed I was getting an interrogation and I switched that curiosity and asked myself, like, what is going on? Because I was feeling this tension in myself. So pay attention to your own feelings and reactions during the conversation.
And then building that psychological safety. And you can do that through being fully present, things we just talked about, because then they will feel more comfortable with just the tone and how you show up and listening. And then I love this one is slowing down interactions that you can create space for reflection and deeper thinking, and realize you don't have to tell. You need to slow it down a bit. So you go slow to go fast. And then balance the sharing perspective, which is advocacy, with inquiry, so that this way you can have genuine dialogue and connection.
So as we wrap up today's episodes, we encourage you to start with an awareness practice. Are you stuck in the habit of telling and transactional communication? Notice how you show up in different situations, and then try putting your ego aside and get into that beginner's mind and try experimenting with humble inquiry. And notice what happens when you approach a conversation with genuine curiosity rather than needing to fix or needing to tell. Because remember, meaningful connection starts with meaningful questions. And we will put the link to Edgar Schein's book into the show notes. It is heavily skewed towards humble inquiry in the work environment, but I recommend it to my clients, when I'm doing in any kind of interpersonal, because the skills, they're the same. There's some that you can skip and just pick through what's relevant for you.
We love to hear about your experience with humble inquiry. Maybe after you read the book, you guys could drop a comment, send us a message, or share this episode with someone else who might benefit from these ideas.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Simply Human. We look forward to doing this exploration into different forms of inquiry. But until next time, like I always say, stay curious and stay kind. And we'll see you later. Bye.